coming on the air with some potentially damning evidence against former President Trump, with a source telling our team there's a tape where he's talking about a classified document he took from the White House. That could totally undercut the defense he's made for months, how he's just now responding in just a minute. We'll also take you live to Davenport, Iowa, with new details tonight on 3 people still believed to be inside a partially collapsed apartment building. Plus, the safety issues the city may have known about before this thing came down. One person telling us he begged workers to leave because he worried they could die. Plus, the new videos we're just getting in of some really dramatic flooding in Texas. People stranded in their cars, roads looking like rivers. We're going to have the forecast on where these storms are headed. Here in Washington, too, tonight it could be the Senate's turn, if not tomorrow, to vote on that key bill that would make sure the government pays its bills on time. The clock ticking. We'll tell you where things stand. Plus, why Walmart is standing its ground, refusing to pull its Pride Month merch, even as boycotts against one of its biggest rivals send that company's stock plunging to the lowest it's been in 3 years. We're talking Target, Bud Light, all of the above later on in the show. Hey there, I'm Hallie, and in just the last hour or so, former President Trump is responding for the first time to a new and potentially damning piece of evidence that may end up leading to potential charges. That possible evidence, a source familiar, says it's Mr. Trump himself. He's apparently on tape. He's talking about having a classified document he's not supposed to have in an investigation that looks at whether or not he improperly took documents he wasn't supposed to have back to Mar-a-Lago. Here's the response from him. It's a local paper in Iowa, and it is, frankly, a pretty familiar line, right? He says, not only is this fake news, it's fake news and a continuation of the witch hunt, he says, that's been going on for years. Here's what we know. The tape is apparently from 2021, according to our sourcing, recorded at his New Jersey golf club, some kind of a sensitive military document related to Iran. That's the sensitive material he was talking about. A grand jury has apparently already heard this tape. NBC News, we should note, has not listened to the recording. Remember what this is all about. Special counsel Jack Smith looking at allegations that the former president mishandled more than 100 classified documents that they ended up finding at Mar-a-Lago last summer. The vibe that our team's getting is that this investigation may be getting close to the end. So this new piece of possible evidence could matter a lot. Why? Because if it is Donald Trump talking about having something he's not supposed to have, it could undermine pretty much every defense that Mr. Trump's given all along. That actually he declassified everything, so there's no need for all this. Like, here's what he said back in September.
I did declassify, yes.
Okay. Is there a process? What was your process to declassify?
There doesn't have to be a process, as I understand it. You know, there's different people say different things, but as I understand, there doesn't have to be. If you're the president of the United States, you can declassify just by saying it's declassified, even by thinking about it.
The former president is on the campaign trail tonight. So is our Vaughn Hilliard, who is live for us in Clive, Iowa. So walk us through what we know, what we're hearing from Donald Trump, and why it matters.
Well, first of all, Hallie, if I may, when it comes to this story, Donald Trump, he took no questions from reporters over the course of his 4 events here today. He is taking part in a town hall with Sean Hannity here that is set to be aired later on this evening. But it was really just those comments in which he called it a witch hunt, fake news. We've heard a continuation, a version of that over the last, 8 years now. But for Donald Trump, this is serious. A special counsel, which was appointed by the Department of Justice, if they were to come down with federal criminal charges, Donald Trump would be facing a trial in most likely Washington, D.C. And these are serious charges. If, in fact, this document had an apparent attack plan on Iran and he was in possession of it, there is, number one, a question of dissemination to whose eyes perhaps saw this document or information was shared from the document. But also, if you look at the timeline, there's a question that the special counsel is looking at when it comes to obstruction of justice and whether Donald Trump tried to hide the fact that he had held on to these classified documents, Hallie.
There is, from the political sphere, right, Vaughn, you make the point that he didn't take questions on this from reporters. He's been out doing these rallies where he takes these questions from people in the audience, Vaughn, right? Like, that's a thing that he's been doing lately. Give us a sense of how this is playing for him. Like, do voters bring it up when you're out at these rallies talking to them? Because Donald Trump is very confident publicly and in sources that we talk with privately that this is not, they don't think, going to hurt him in the primary.
Right, and the advisors will be quick to tell you and me that voters aren't asking Donald Trump about that. And by and large, they're right. And that's where I think a lot of times our role as journalists is understanding the legal peril that he's potentially in. But when you talk to voters, I want to let you just hear from one of them. Steve, you caucused for Donald Trump 8 years ago. He said he intends to caucus for him again. I asked him about this investigation. Take a listen.
For God's sakes, he was the president. He has the right to take things and declassify, and so we make a big deal of it. And what do we find with our current president? I mean, I don't want to use that as an excuse, but everything they throw at him is the things they're guilty of.
And Hallie, I think the big question here in the 8 months before the Iowa caucus comes up next year is, will these other Republican candidates like Ron DeSantis, Nikki Haley, will they try to use the legal peril that Donald Trump finds himself in? Will they try to use these investigations to their political advantage? Because right now, they aren't. And that is where Republican voters and apparently the other Republican candidates don't seem to care too much.
But can I ask you a question? Like, just from a purely political perspective, why would they? Because the numbers for Donald Trump have gone up inside the Republican electorate after he has faced legal troubles. We saw that with his indictment weeks ago now, that he actually increased his standing inside the GOP. I'm not saying that's going to help in a general, but when you're talking about a primary, what incentive would his opponents have to bring that up against him?
Right, and that is where a Trump ally in Florida told me very specifically the onus is on the likes of Ron DeSantis, who has two options. Number one, do you defend Donald Trump and buy into this idea that there is a deep state that is trying to undermine the Republican conservative movement? Or do you turn your back on Donald Trump and suggest that this entire time he was a fraud after we saw Republicans like Ron DeSantis defend him time and time again over the years? And was that simply just a political show at the time? These Republican opponents find themselves really in kind of a tricky position that they have put themselves into at this point, Hallie.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us in what appears to be a rainy Clive, Iowa. Vaughn, thank you very much. Speaking of rain, way more of it in Texas with some dramatic video of several people getting rescued after they got stranded in their cars. I want to show you this, right? This is a highway. It's in like the northwest part of Texas. Looks like a lake, right? You've got cars lined up. They're trying to go somewhere. They can't get anywhere. As you can see, the water is up just past the wheel wells, getting close to the wheel wells at least. Somebody actually had to climb out of their front door window to get out of the car, and then it starts floating away. There's a semi-truck flipped over on its side in another piece of video right here on the highway. Cars are all stuck behind it, lined up. This is what it is going to look like, unfortunately, potentially for hours tonight, with more rain expected on the way. Bill Cairns is going to tell us what's going on there in a minute. But before that, we want to take you north to Canada, where the country is finally getting some help as it battles out-of-control wildfires in Nova Scotia. The fires stretch about 50,000 acres, no sign of slowing down, with the U.S. sending some firefighters up to help. Air quality is an issue, too. I want to bring in Miguel Almaguer now. Miguel, you've covered a lot of fires here in the U.S., in California, in the West. We have now this situation happening in Canada and much-needed help sort of pouring into the region at this point.
Yeah, they need that help badly, Hallie, and the firefight is still certainly underway. As mentioned, there's at least 16 fires burning, including that new one that broke out today. 4 fires in all are burning out of control at this very hour. Now, this has become a historic wildfire season for Nova Scotia. They've never seen a single blaze this large. Over the last 24 hours, officials have pleaded for help. Now they're going to get it. Crews from Canada, Costa Rica, and now, as you mentioned, here in the U.S. are headed into the fire zone. There's some good news on the weather front, too, we should point out. After days of relentless heat, rain is finally in the forecast. And just a short time ago, we spoke to some evacuees. Here's what they had to say.
It was smoke everywhere. It was dark. Everybody everywhere. It just kind of seemed like pure panic. It was kind of surreal. It was, adrenaline rush. Just get what you could get. And I froze when I got in the house. I got all the animals, and then I just looked around and was like, well, what do I take?
So folks there in Nova Scotia certainly on the edge and in need of help, Hallie.
It is remarkable to think about the air quality issue here, too, and how far it's drifted even into the U.S. here on the East Coast from this new wave of fires.
Yeah, this week, air quality in a few states here in the U.S. was impacted. The smoke was drifting from the north and impacting some major cities. Now, the good news is that threat today is beginning to dissipate, but because the fires are still burning, it could certainly become a major issue again very quickly. That's why so many are hoping for that rain we mentioned earlier and why more crews are going to be on the way, Hallie.
Miguel Almaguer, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's bring in meteorologist Bill Cairns now. Bill, let's talk about everything that's going on weather-wise in the world, right? And I want to start with that flooding in Texas here. There's also a tropical depression that is getting tracked.
Yeah, the tropical depression, we'll start with this because, you know, it's the beginning of hurricane season. This is an officially tracked storm now from the Hurricane Center. So for people on the Gulf Coast and in Florida, you're watching your local news, your local NBC station, this is the lead story. This is like a big deal. They're like, okay, we got a storm we're tracking. Where's it going? Who's it going to impact? You know, is this going to turn into a big problem as we head towards the upcoming weekend? So this is where the storm is located. So you notice it's kind of just due south here of Pensacola, Panama City, and it's pretty much due west of the Tampa area. It's a small storm. It's only a tropical depression. So this isn't like a big beast of a storm, and it doesn't even have anything on the bottom half of it, just some heavy rain in the north. But it's far enough offshore to avoid Apalachicola and Panama City right now, so that's good. It's just drifting right now, but in the days ahead, in the next 2 days, it's going to start moving to the south. And that's an unusual storm motion. It just kind of shows you we have a little bit of a wacky weather pattern across the country. High pressure is going to push it to the south, and that's actually going to keep it away from the Florida Peninsula and heading towards western Cuba. The Hurricane Center does bring it from 35 miles per hour now to 40. Why does that make a difference? Well, once we hit 39, then it becomes Tropical Storm Arlene. So we are possibly likely tomorrow, or maybe even late tonight, you'll hear a headliner saying the first tropical storm of the season has formed, Arlene, but it's not heading towards Florida. Now, indirectly, some of the moisture will head towards Florida and some of the rainfall, but not directly. And that's why I don't think it's going to be huge impacts. Most people in Florida are just going to think to themselves, this is just like a typical, you know, summer afternoon. You're going to have periods of heavy rain and storms, localized flooding, but no direct impacts, Hallie, with our likely first storm of the season.
That is for sure. And real quick, Bill, that flooding in Texas.
Yeah, that's been amazing. I mean, those pictures. I mean,
going to be done by the time the night clears out, right? Like tomorrow morning, we're not going to have more of a risk there?
Correct. This isn't river flooding. This is flash flooding. So flash flooding, it goes up quickly, and then it goes away quickly. And the thing to notice is how flat this part of Texas is.
Yeah.
So, you know, the water may only be 2 feet deep, but it looks like it's an ocean, and that will quickly dissipate and leave the region. We will have additional chances for flash flooding tomorrow when we have new thunderstorms, but it won't look anything like this. And the biggest issue is there are many highways that are closed and roads that are closed because they've been washed out. And so that's going to be the issue, and the problem is people trying to get around this region because they still have yet to assess how the condition of the roads because there's still water on them.
Thank you so much, Bill Cairns. Appreciate it. Tonight, we are getting brand new details about what seems to be an apparent lack of accountability leading up to that partially collapsed apartment building in Davenport, Iowa, the collapse of it, with rescuers right now racing to find at least 3 people still believed to be trapped inside. The city is finally releasing those people's names: Brandon Colvin, Ryan Hitchcock, Daniel Prean. They are all still unaccounted for. And we're just learning that the woman on the right in this picture, Quenisha Berry, she was actually trapped in this building. Surgeons had to amputate her leg at the collapse site just to get her free. Right now, she's in the hospital in critical condition. It comes as we're hearing some, frankly, extraordinary new details that a masonry company owner, somebody who basically fixes damaged buildings, is telling our team he walked by this site the day before it collapsed. He saw construction workers fixing up a big crack that went down the building and said, hey, stop. Again, just 24 hours before this collapse. Listen.
I literally begged them, please leave, you're going to die. If you continue to work on it, it was just too dangerous for them to be there.
We're also learning today about documents showing management knew about safety issues but did not do enough to fix them. An engineer warning that patches of the building's bricks seem to be ready to fall imminently. I'm quoting here, just 4 days before the collapse. The mayor saying in a news conference today that something should have been done sooner.
Do I have regrets about this tragedy and about people potentially losing their lives? Hell yeah. Do I think about this every moment? Hell yeah.
I want to bring in Shaq Brewster, who's on the ground for us live in Davenport, Iowa. What is going on with these 3 people still believed to be trapped inside? Let's start there, Shaq.
Well, Hallie, there is still an active search for them. And I say active because the crews have to be extremely careful. And I should say, I hesitate to say active because crews have to be extremely careful. They are concerned about the condition of this building. They've been warning us since early this week that it can come crumbling down at any time. But when I asked about the latest with the search and rescue, the mayor told me today that they are starting to bring in outside crews, people from outside states. They're consulting with the folks in Florida that have had to deal with this at the Surfside condo area. They're consulting with people who have dealt with these kind of tragedies before to see how they can recover those bodies. Again, they want to be extremely careful as they're doing it.
How about then? Okay, so that's sort of the urgent thing that's happening now, Shaq, right? Like whether these people are going to be found, where they are, et cetera. There's also this Monday morning quarterbacking, frankly, that is happening with all of these warnings, right? Verbal warnings, documented warnings before this building partially collapsed, before it, that clearly went unheeded.
Exactly. And these are the warnings that I'm sure you know this, Hallie, because we've been talking about it, but that residents, members of this community have been talking about and have been saying the leaks inside, the cracks that residents have had to deal with. Well, now it's being proven by the documents from the city. I asked the mayor earlier today what his big takeaway from these documents and from this release of information is and what can change from here. Listen to a little bit of that exchange. Did the permitting process and inspection process, did it fail?
So we have a pretty rigorous inspection process now, and we've upped that numerous times in the last few years.
So it is something that they are focused on, but it's also something that the city is defending. They're saying that the documents that we saw are proof that the system not is completely working, but it shows that if there's a complaint, it's followed up by an inspection. It's required to have an outside structural engineer to come in. He says they will review it, but it's also their argument is they're being transparent about what the process is from behind the scenes.
Shaq Brewster live for us in Davenport. Shaq, thank you. Back here at home tonight in Washington, the ball is in the Senate's court to make sure that the U.S. does pay its bills on time and, by doing so, avoid a financial catastrophe. Take a live look here. This is the Senate floor. We're watching timing because Senator Joe Manchin on the Democratic side has just been telling our team that we may see some action in maybe an hour and a half from now. But somebody else says, the vote's probably more likely to be tomorrow. Remember, the timeline matters to a degree. As long as it happens before Monday, that June 5th deadline, that is a good thing. That deadline, June 5th, is the so-called X date, which is when if we don't pay the debts that we owe as a nation, we could default. That would be catastrophic globally. The top Democrat in the Senate warning that things have got to start getting moving.
Time is a luxury the Senate does not have if we want to prevent default. June 5th is less than 4 days away. At this point, any needless delay or any last-minute holdups would be an unnecessary and even dangerous risk.
I want to bring in Hallie Vitale, who is live for us on Capitol Hill. Okay, fine. So 90 minutes, maybe some action. Maybe tomorrow we'll see some action. The bottom line, it does seem to be more a matter of when, not if. Fair?
Yeah, that's exactly the right read on this. I mean, we're at the point right now where one senator told us to start looking at the floor at 6 o'clock, and now it's like 6:14, and we're looking at the floor and nothing's happening. So I don't know. We're in silly season, but the reality is every senator that we've talked to, even the ones who don't like this plan and this deal, still seem to be under the assumption that if they get an amendment vote on something that they want, they will be able to then fast track this. All deadlines will be met, and this deal will ultimately go through without any changes. The without any changes piece is really important because if an amendment were to pass that changed the bill or took something out of it or added it into it, then that bill would have to go back to the House before being sent to the White House. That's something that there's no time for. And so, of course, that also needs to be avoided and likely will be here, too. Nevertheless, we've heard from a wide range of senators today. These are their opinions on what's happening right now. Watch.
It will pass. I believe it'll pass as intact. I haven't decided. We're still discussing. I'm not going to be part of anything that risks default.
And so that's a reason that most Democrats are giving, even if they don't like what's in this deal, they don't want to risk default. It's the same kind of a rationale that I heard from House Democrats who were none too pleased with what this ended up looking like, but still believed that at the end of the day, what's bad that they see in this bill is still not worth defaulting on U.S. credit for the first time ever. So the real mood check here, since I know you love doing those as well.
We love a vibe check, Al. Who doesn't?
We've been sending vibe checks all day, and the vibe check here is sort of like, shrug, okay, it's not a matter of if but when, and we're just kind of playing the waiting game now.
Well, good luck. Have fun tonight.
Yeah,
we'll talk again maybe later or tomorrow. Appreciate it, Hallie. Thank you very much. Target stock today is dropping to the lowest it's been in 3 years as it faces a ton of pressure from conservatives over its line of Pride Month merchandise. Look at the slide here over in just the last year. It's on its worst losing streak right now in more than 2 decades. JP Morgan thinks Target's in for some tough times. It downgraded Target stock today, right as the company is facing boycotts, even threats to stores for selling some of the items that you're about to see. Shirts, backpacks, etc., all with this LGBTQ plus theme for Pride Month, which starts today. This kind of backlash is becoming kind of a trend. We're talking about backlash on the right here. There's some other brands that have been facing it. Bud Light, we've talked about that. Kohl's, PetSmart, North Face, Lego now, even Chick-fil-A. Once a kind of right-wing darling for donating to anti-gay groups in the past and closing on Sundays, they're now not immune to these calls for boycotts from conservatives because of the company's diversity efforts. But you've got one big store going in the other direction. That's Walmart. They say they're refusing to pull merch from their Pride and Joy line off the shelves. And they're standing by their decision, even in the face of all this possible backlash. Stephanie Gosk joins us now. Here we are in the first day of Pride Month, and we are seeing in this really illustrative way the intersection between the sort of business sector and the so-called, I think, culture war sector, right? Like the sort of politics of it all colliding. And it has a bottom line impact for some of these companies, as Target seems to be very well aware of now.
It certainly does. And there are a couple of things that are worth noting here. First, what I would say is 10 years ago, it would be hard to imagine that you'd have this many companies going in on Pride Month the way that they are, with merchandise and shirts and T-shirts and really mainstreaming the idea of Pride Month. And what is that? That's really a reflection of society in general and a massive change in cultural attitudes towards the LGBTQ community, and specifically the last decade since the Supreme Court legalized gay marriage. But what we're also seeing here is a real lightning rod issue when it comes to transgender issues. And a lot of these boycotts and anger are focused on the idea of transgender issues. For Target, there was a transgender-friendly bathing suit that was part of their display. It was in the front of many of their stores. It created an unsafe environment, Target said, for some of its employees. In some of their stores, they moved it to the back of the store. And then you had, so they actually took action. They were criticized for taking. Other stores are saying, you know what, we're fine with our merchandise. And why are they doing that? Well, GLAAD had a recent survey that said that 70% of Americans, 70, believe that companies should publicly support the LGBTQ community. But this issue of transgender rights, well, that is a firestorm of controversy, Hallie.
Well, and there is a bigger picture to it, too, right? It is not just the business sector, the political sector. There is a real world impact here because you look at the backdrop, right? Just one example. A map here from the Human Rights Campaign, we want to pull it up. 20 states have passed laws that ban gender-affirming care for minors that a lot of health experts say can be life-saving. Another 7 states are considering similar legislation. Again, just one example of what LGBTQ plus advocates see as an attack on trans rights, on gay rights. Help us put this moment into context. I know you're speaking with experts who are trying to do that.
Yeah, I spoke with a historian at Columbia University who puts a little bit of this in perspective in terms of the Pride movement in general and how issues throughout the decades have really split the country into this kind of fraught cultural consternation. Listen to what he had to say.
We've seen this backlash before in the 70s, in the 90s, in the early part of this century over other issues. Ultimately, I think the progress will continue, but it's still a very dangerous moment. And the most vulnerable people in our community, transgender people, are the ones most at risk.
And like so many issues today, Hallie, we are sucked into this vortex of extreme rhetoric on both sides, and it makes it almost impossible to have a reasonable conversation when it comes to transgender rights and issues.
Stephanie Gosk, thank you very much for that reporting. Coming up here on the show, a bunch of flights delayed today across the country, but not because of the weather. We'll tell you what some airlines say happened. Plus, new data out of the CDC says a lot more older women are having babies. We'll explain in the 5 things. And maybe among the least surprising headlines of the evening, that getting married is getting way more expensive. But we're going to tell you why experts say that is, and that's interesting in our 5 things. But first, Canada is set to become the first country in the world to have health warnings printed on individual cigarettes, not just the pack, but on each individual cig. And they're going to put the stuff you see here, words like poison in every puff, tobacco smoke harms children, cigarettes cause impotence. It's going to be written in English and in French on the cigarette, actually the cigarette. It's part of a strategy to try to cut the number of smokers in Canada in half, from around 10% to under 5% over the next 10 years, according to Health Canada. They're also going to make more dramatic the pictures, the graphic images of stuff like neck cancer that are on cigarette packs now. Canada's mental health and addictions minister calls it a bold step that will make these warnings virtually unavoidable. People will start to see them on their cigarettes later on this summer. Dr. Natalie Azar is joining us now. So first of all, why do this, right? What is the impetus for this? Is this a broader push in Canada to try to get a handle on the number of people who smoke there?
Yeah, and I think it's following trends, right? I mean, Canada was the first, I think, country to even have labels or pictures on their cigarette packets. And, you know, I think it's really speaking to this concept of, you know, not only sort of playing to human nature and psyche and everything, but it's really about education. I think that there is an assumption or a presumption that everyone who smokes understands all of the risks. And I just don't think that that's necessarily true. And, you know, so I give them credit for doing this. You know, we'll see whether the U.S. follows suit. We certainly have our own history of you know, significant public health intervention and changes, starting with the 1964 Surgeon General warning for the very first time, which made a huge dent in the number of people who smoked.
It is a dramatic thing to say poison in every puff, right, on the actual cigarette as somebody is smoking it. But there is also, I mean, this is clearly part of it, intended to not just warn people, but there's a shame factor here, too. And we know that shame doesn't always work when it comes to medicine and public health. Doesn't work when it comes to vaccines, for example, whether it's the COVID vaccine, whether it's measles vaccines. That is not something that is often a convincing factor for folks. Do you think there's a chance this could backfire? Do you think the evidence is strong enough to show that even warnings like this could make a difference?
So I do think that there is evidence, Hallie, that warning labels make a difference. And I think there was a very important study that was reported on a couple of years ago where they looked at warning labels actually did increase the number of people who quit. I certainly don't think that we're going to see suddenly people, you know, in response to this increasing their smoking habits, right? I mean, to your point, yes, I think that you have to be careful about this. I don't necessarily think doing anything in a sort of patronizing or coercive manner is necessarily the right approach. But I think, you know, when the pictures are graphic, the commercials, right, are also graphic, showing people who are dying of lung cancer. You know, a lot of people will give anecdotes about how they didn't realize it until they were in the gross anatomy lab and they saw black lungs versus, you know, pink lungs. Medical students used to smoke all the time. So, you know, whatever it takes, sometimes a little bit of that, you know, shock actually does and can work, Hallie. And you know, I think this is aimed at improving people's health. I think that not doing it isn't necessarily the answer. There's blunt tools like increasing the age that you can, you know, buy cigarettes, increasing taxes on cigarettes. There's only so much you can do, and I don't have a problem with this. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Dr. Natalie Azar, thank you very much. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, the White House says President Biden is fine after a bit of a stumble today. You can see it here. He apparently tripped over a sandbag, the White House says, fell down, delivering this commencement address to the Air Force Academy. You had some Secret Service agents, somebody from the Air Force come in, help him up. He continued on, with his participation. You see him pointing there, maybe down at that sandbag. Number 2, 3 people have been killed by a Russian missile attack in Kyiv this morning, including a 9-year-old girl and her mother. 16 others were hurt. Kyiv's mayor says they're looking into why a shelter at a medical facility was locked so that people couldn't actually get to safety. Number 3, something like 90% of Spirit flights got delayed today. The airline says it was because of a technical problem on its app, at its kiosks at the airport, on its website. 3% of flights were canceled altogether. The company said sorry and that it was working to get back to normal operations. Number 4, more American women are having children later in life, according to a new report out from the CDC, which says the birth rate in women over the age of 40 went up last year. The biggest leap was in women over the age of 45, up 12%. The overall number of births to women that age is still pretty low. Birth rates went up a little bit for women older than 35, between 35 and 40 as well. Number 5, it is getting more expensive than ever to get married, according to a report from Zola, which, if you've had a wedding registry or purchased from one, you know is a wedding website. The average wedding in the United States this year costs about $29,000. If you live in a big city, it's even more. It's up from the $28,000 weddings cost roughly last year, according to those estimates. Who's paying for them? The company says more couples are contributing themselves rather than just letting parents or families pay. And some are adding a cash fund to their wedding registry. When we come back, new warnings tonight about the economy here, why the things people are buying are raising some red flags. A lot of stars showing up at a royal wedding in Jordan, but that's not the only reason we're talking about it. That's coming up later this hour. But first, new numbers today may be sounding the alarm that the economy is not out of the woods yet. It's all based on how people are choosing to spend their money. You've got Macy's today lowering expectations after they say people just aren't buying as much in the first few months of the year. The company's CEO says he expected things to be bad, but things are actually worse than he thought. Macy's isn't the only ones. People aren't just changing how they're shopping for stuff like clothes. Costco says people are changing how they're buying food. Fewer, more expensive products like meat, more cheaper stuff like pork or chicken, which is something that Costco says they've seen in recessions before. Brian Chung joins me now. I say previous recession. We aren't in a recession yet, according to the experts, right? I mean, that's still an open question. But talk to me about that piece of it. Like, what do these numbers show when it comes to the way that people are spending their money, and why are some alarm bells going off?
Yeah, and you can see, Hallie, some of this as perhaps a leading indicator of a slowdown happening in the future, because Americans are already starting to shift around their wallets to prioritize saving on the bottom line. With high inflation, it's no wonder that you're seeing consumers try to pull back. So when you talk about Macy's, for example, in their earnings report, they said that net sales were $5 billion. That sounds pretty good, but not so good when you consider it's down 7% compared to last year. And we heard from the Macy's CEO on an earnings release saying that they planned the year assuming that the economic health of the consumer would be challenged. But then starting in about the spring, demand trends weakened further in our discretionary categories. A translation, people aren't buying things that they don't need in this economy. And you mentioned Costco. Even when we talk about food, things that people need to buy, they're making trade downs. They're not buying as much red meat. They're buying chicken, and in some cases, they're even buying things like canned tuna, canned chicken, because it's a lot cheaper than the fresh stuff. And as is, of course, the case with Costco, you also have the option of the $1.50 hot dog. So there's a lot of other places where you can save pennies here, which some of these companies, Hallie, are actually starting to see. That is literally me. What the? Did you
it's you eating a $1.50 hot dog. We know you're so obsessed with them that we just pulled up a picture so we could show people.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we knew you were going to talk about it. You love the $1.50 hot dog at Costco.
That was on my birthday too, so that was literally what I wanted.
Amazing birthday dinner. I'm thrilled for you. You're like the most dapper man at Costco, by the way.
Thank you.
Can we talk a little bit about the idea, though? You called it a slowdown, which I think is interesting. The idea that some of these numbers are leading indicators of a slowdown. What does that mean, right? Like, in other words, people who are scared of a recession, slowdown doesn't feel quite as scary. How should we be making sense of some of these numbers here? Because they're kind of all over the place in some ways.
Yeah, well, certainly. When we talk about just kind of the overall economic picture, you take a look at consumer confidence, right? So we got a release just yesterday from one read of a consumer confidence that comes from the Conference Board, and it showed that the number ticked down to 102.3, which in their index is a 6-month low. And when we talk about consumer confidence, that is the willingness of people to open up their wallets in the future. And again, that's no surprise with high inflation continuing to really crunch on our bottom lines. You're seeing people really concerned there, including myself, trying to save money with that $1.50 hot dog.
Makes absolute perfect sense. I'm sorry we didn't flag you to the fact that your picture eating a hot dog would be on TV. It feels like we should warn you next time. Brian Chung, thank you so much. Happy birthday. Appreciate you. Thanks. Coming up here on the show, the number of American college students studying in China is way down. Why experts say that could be a problem not easily fixed in our original tonight. Plus, a big potato spill leading to an arrest in Denmark. We'll explain in the Global. To tonight's original now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight it's the unexpected collateral damage from those tensions with China lately. Turns out the U.S. is sending fewer and fewer college students to study abroad in China. And that can make it really hard to train the next generation of diplomats. Before the pandemic, thousands of American students went to China to study every year and vice versa. But China's zero COVID policy, combined with diplomatic breakdowns over Taiwan, the South China Sea, and Ukraine, have meant those opportunities have almost completely dried up. Janice Mackey-Frere has the story.
Around the world, colleges and universities were seriously affected by the pandemic. But here in China, the impact has lingered. Universities, including American schools that have campuses here, are open as usual. But the number of Americans attending them has plummeted. A decade ago, there were nearly 15,000 U.S. students in China. Today, there are only 350. Those numbers from the State Department. It's like a 98% drop. And it's a problem that won't be easily fixed, according to the U.S. ambassador here.
American universities couldn't run their summer study programs. They couldn't run their junior year in China programs. And so it all just dried up. We need to have the next generation of China experts for our entire government. They come out of these universities. But frankly, we're going to need some help from the Chinese government. They're going to have to give the visas and create the atmosphere that would be receptive to American students coming back.
It wasn't just the pandemic or China's zero COVID rules keeping American students away. U.S.-China relations have hit a unique low in recent years, and the tension has trickled down to student and scholar exchanges, which had long sort of greased the geopolitics. At NYU Shanghai, it's meant a dramatic change in the landscape, since the campus was the first American university to establish here back in 2012.
There are fewer Americans. In terms of enrollment, it's tough for me to say. There are fewer due to the inability to get back, or maybe the hesitance to come back due to the situation on the ground here.
What is the long-term impact?
I think just one of the benefits of being here is being somewhat of a soft, informal diplomat of the country and the culture, and not having actual Americans having that experience and being able to go back and testify and speak to their communities about what actually happens is a huge loss.
Now, to be clear, the number of American students here was in decline even before the pandemic, which gutted study abroad programs everywhere. Figures from the State Department and the Institute of International Education show that hundreds of thousands of Americans just stopped going to Japan, the UK, and other countries to study. The number of Chinese students going to the U.S. has slipped too, but only slightly, down 15% from 2 years ago to roughly 300,000. International students are a huge revenue source for U.S. schools. In 2018, Chinese students contributed $15 billion to the economy, according to the Commerce Department. The challenge with China, it could take years for U.S. student numbers to bounce back. The country only just reopened to tourism in March, and the mood here has, well, shifted. Megan C. started at NYU Shanghai 4 years ago. Despite all the headwinds, she wants to graduate this year, so she came back from Maryland.
I think there are obvious benefits of being exposed to a place that, I mean, clearly has a lot of importance in the U.S. in terms of U.S. foreign policy and U.S.-China relations.
In any difficult, challenging relationship, and that's what we have with China, right? A relationship really based on competition globally. You need ballast in the relationship, and people are the ballast. You want the two countries people to be talking to each other. And 20-year-olds probably do that best, and they achieve a degree of familiarity and expertise in a country that is lifelong.
Janice Mackey-Freyer is joining us now live from Beijing. Thank you so much for bringing us that look into this really interesting issue that is super forward-looking, super future-looking. What about the flip side of this? In other words, Chinese students coming to study in the U.S. What are you hearing about that piece of it?
Well, there are factors influencing those decisions, too. Look, the pandemic had an impact. Chinese students, if they were leaving China, they didn't know when they would be able to come back to see their parents because the borders only opened here a few months ago. So that was definitely a factor. But anecdotally, of the young people we talked to, so many of them told us, Hallie, that their parents watch the news and they see the news coming out of the U.S., gun violence, rise in anti-Asian attacks, the politics, and they're influencing these young people to consider other places. There has been an uptick in the number of Chinese students going to the UK, to Canada, to Australia. Still a lot of them going to the US, but in some cases, they are being asked to give it a second thought.
Given that, Janice, what is the balance between what you just described, some of these concerns that, as you say, these parents have watching, let's say, the news, with the value of an education from the United States, which, as you say, still holds weight in China?
It certainly holds weight. It's still seen as something of prestige, almost a status symbol to have this American education. The objectives for these young people remain the same, no matter where they go to study. They want to go to improve their English. They want to improve their employability. The vast majority of Chinese students who study abroad come back to China. And so they want to be the most employable that they can be in what's now an increasingly tough job market here. Hallie?
Janice Mackey-Freyer live for us tonight from Beijing. Janice, thank you. NBC News covers hundreds of other international stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here's some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. Out of France, Novak Djokovic, the tennis star, says he's standing by his comment about Kosovo, but that he wants to put the controversy over his statement at the French Open behind him. This is something we brought you yesterday. Is our original reporting. How he wrote on that camera lens that Kosovo is the heart of Serbia. He was referring to centuries-old tensions between the countries. Basically, Kosovo says it's independent. Serbia disagrees. Djokovic, who's Serbian, has his third-round match in the French Open tomorrow. Out of Denmark, police say a truck driver's been detained after loads of, yes, potatoes were found all over a bridge. Not just any bridge, but the one that connects the capital to the rest of the country. A police spokesperson says this was extra weird because there were like 2 potato spills on this one particular bridge. They're looking at whether this was an accident, just a coincidence, or maybe done on purpose because the roads allegedly got all slippery. The driver was held on suspicion of causing reckless endangerment. And out of Jordan, today the Crown Prince, tying the knot, marrying a Saudi architect. The celebration bringing huge crowds. Look at this parade of sorts down the street. A lot of VIPs were there, including Prince William and Kate. First Lady Jill Biden was there. It is not just a royal wedding, however. There is more to this because there is a political undertone to this, too, as Jordan tries to move past recent controversies and economic problems. Let's bring in Raf Sanchez now. Not trying to put like the weight of an entire region geopolitically on the shoulders of this newlywed couple. But what is so interesting is that this is a royal wedding that goes beyond kind of the celebrity pictures and the dresses and the fashion.
Yeah, Hallie. So for starters, I think yours and my invitations, I'm sure, just got lost in the mail somewhere. But yes, this was a bread and circus moment, a big, lavish public spectacle in Jordan, and really an opportunity for the Jordanian royal family to kind of rally public support after what you said has been a difficult period. So let's start with the economy. Jordan is a poor country. It doesn't have the natural resources, the oil wealth of its neighbors like Saudi Arabia. Unemployment in Jordan, Hallie, is 20%. So that's about 5 times the unemployment rate in the U.S. Youth unemployment is closer to 40%. So people have been hurting there for a long time. And as you said, inside the royal family, there has been this kind of Game of Thrones style psychodrama. It's really complicated.
But the short version is the former king, the late king of Jordan, King Hussein, had a number of sons. His son, King Abdullah, is the current monarch, but Abdullah has accused his half-brother, King Hamza, of plotting against the crown, and he has basically had his half-brother and his half-brother's family under house arrest now for 2 years or so.
Right.
And so this wedding is kind of a chance to put a new shine on the royal family, to put, you know, a kind of gloss on the image, and to really give the Jordanian people something that they can feel good about.
You know, it is also, again, marriage between two people, but it brings together, obviously, in the Jordanian groom, somebody from a not oil-rich country, the Saudi bride, somebody from an oil-rich country.
Totally. So Crown Prince Hussein of Jordan is marrying a Saudi. His wife is not herself a Saudi royal, but her family is close to the Saudi royal family, led at this moment by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who we all remember from the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. And Saudi Arabia is an incredibly important country for Jordan because it has that oil wealth that Jordan doesn't. Jordan is very reliant on international assistance. It would like to make sure that that pipeline of Saudi money continues to flow. Now, King Abdullah, the current monarch, he's only 61. We have every expectation he's going to be on the throne for a long time. But this is sort of an investment in Jordan's future. Hallie.
Raf Sanchez, thank you so much. Interesting stuff. Appreciate it. Still to come, there's this new weight loss supplement that's been everywhere online, being called Nature's Ozempic. But does it actually work? Is it actually safe? The reality check next. There's this supplement some people are calling Nature's Ozempic. Its real name, berberine. It has been everywhere online, all over TikTok. Watch.
Nature's Ozempic Day 2 update, berberine. I am obsessed. I don't understand how this stuff is legal.
So last week, I lost a total of 0.5 pounds. So the scale still went down, bringing my total in 30 days to 6.5 pounds, which is major for me.
And the side effects don't seem that bad, like some diarrhea, upset stomach. I'm like, I'm down for a little bit of that.
Okay. That's a lot of information being shared on TikTok, but there you go. What is berberine? What is it? It's found in a bunch of plants. People say it's a supplement that can make you less hungry. It can make your blood sugar levels better. All of that can lead to losing weight. This stuff is becoming popular online, partly because it's cheap and it's available. Two things that Ozempic and Wegovy are not. Both of those drugs are in short supply in the U.S. They cost something like $1,000 out of pocket. You also need a prescription. Not so with berberine. You can get it online. It's pretty widely available. No prescription needed. It's like $15 to $40 a month. But does it work? And maybe more importantly, is it actually safe for you to take? Berkeley Lovelace is joining us now. So, Berkeley, let me just answer that question right out the gate. There's a lot of stuff that people say you should do on TikTok that you should definitely not do. Is berberine one of those things or not?
Yeah, so companies can pretty much make about any claim that they want, but the debate is kind of still out there whether or not berberine actually works. And so a lot of the studies were done in animals, not humans, but in some of those human studies, they did see some benefits for heart health and also a few benefits for weight loss, but there still needs to be larger studies to confirm whether or not that actually is effective. And then also, there's also questions about safety. And so without those large studies, we don't know if this is safe for everyone or even safe during use of pregnancy.
But it is huge business, supplement in general, right? Just big picture, stepping back more broadly. It's something like $50 billion that Americans spend every year on vitamins and supplements. If you buy them, you know they are not cheap. Put this into that broader business context for us.
Yeah, you should definitely always be cautious about the supplements you take. They can pretty much make about any health claim that they want. Sometimes these supplements can contain inaccurate information on the label. They also may not have any of the ingredients that they're actually listed on the bottles. But it's a little bit easier to get on the shelf because the FDA does not review or regulate these for safety or effectiveness. But at that point, it's on the person to determine whether or not that this is safe for them to use. So experts told me that you should speak with a doctor if you want to take something like berberine for weight loss. The side effects were like nausea and vomiting, but if you have like other side effects, you may want to stop taking it or also speak with a doctor about it.
Berkeley Lovelace, thank you very much.
Thanks.
A lot of things out there on the internet. Appreciate the fact check. Including, of course, our show. That does it for us this hour. We'll see you here tomorrow. Top Story picks up our coverage.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.